This is a story my father told me back when I was about 8 years old. And it's about his father when he was maybe 30 years old. Granddad was the first county agent in Illinois and in Iowa. This meant he was a county agricultural agent. He would go around to farmers and would suggest what approaches they might take that would improve their yield and would enhance their lives by making their farms more productive. Much later in his life, he described his boyhood in eastern Iowa. He said he hadn't even left his home county until he was 19 years old. So for a man who eventually went out into the world and helped farmers in Mexico, it was interesting that he'd had such a narrow childhood and had broadened out to that extent in his early adult years. So eventually, what Granddad developed was a set of questions in a questionnaire. He would take them to a farm, sit down with the farmer, come up with a series of numbers, go back to his office, run the numbers against what other farmers in similar and different situations had come up with. Then he would revisit the farmer and describe how he might improve productivity on his small farm, because they were mostly small family farms in those days. He visited this one farm, Dad said, one time. And I'm not sure if it was in Iowa or Illinois, but Granddad visited this farm, and it was run by two brothers. They sat him down at the dining room table, and in the next room, in the parlor, but within earshot, was their mother, who sat crocheting while her two sons, the farmers, the active farmers in the family, discussed with my grandfather their crops and what ideas they had towards improving their farm, and asking Granddad to see if he agreed with their ideas or what he had to suggest. So they went through the standard questionnaire. Granddad went away, came back a few weeks later, sat down at the same table with these men, and he said, "Now, I understand that you two aren't particularly fond of chickens." Brothers both shook their heads. No, they didn't like chickens especially. They were kind of a nuisance. They preferred to deal with crops in the fields and have big equipment and go out and work the soil. That was what they thought of as worth the name of farming. And Granddad said, "Well, is it for your mother that you keep these chickens? Does she want to have a chicken run nearby for her cooking and to have eggs?" They said yes. They agreed that yes, that was basically why they kept these 20 or so chickens, was to placate their mother, who liked having fresh eggs and liked having a fryer now and then that she could pluck and cook for Sunday dinner. Granddad said, "Well, I thought that might be how you felt, but I have to tell you something interesting that my numbers have shown." Now, I shook them out several different ways. I looked at them from different angles. I tried to think of how it might work out best for you. And I have to say, you may not enjoy hearing this, but I have to say that unit for unit and dollar for dollar in what you've been spending, the thing that has made you the most money in your farm has been your chickens. "Our chickens," said one of the brothers. And I'm all over this concept. It had never occurred to him that their chickens were making any money at all. And Granddad said, "Yes, your chickens that your mother has been selling locally, a few of them, and the eggs she's been selling. I'll go into the details with you, but the conditions on this farm are such that you might make considerably more money if you looked on your grain as a way of feeding your chickens, and not just your chickens as a way of keeping your mother happy, but if you grew the particular grains that your chickens seem to like best and raised more of them, more poultry, I think you might prosper in a larger way, and it might be very satisfying to you over time. You'd have to experiment first and see if it was working out. But I'm proposing to you that you set aside a certain amount of your grain and you raise more chickens, and we'll see from year to year how this goes. I'll keep coming back and we'll talk about it. Well, the two farmers had considerable respect for Granddad already, even though he was a young man, only around 30 at the time, and they were the ones who'd been farming this land. Still, he was the one who'd gone to Ames and had studied agriculture and had the title and had the questionnaire that he filled out. He wasn't pretentious in his demeanor, my grandfather, not at all. And he wasn't overbearing in the way he suggested these things to the farmers. He brought it on as softly as he could, this view, because he knew it was going to shake them a little bit. They liked him, and they were willing to take a chance on him with part of their profit margin, if you could call it that, on a farm, which was slim at best and very dependent on the weather, as it always is with farms. So they made a small shift in the first year and a somewhat larger shift second, and so on. And imagine their surprise when, after only about 10 years of this new approach to their farming, their poultry operation was one of the largest in the whole state of whichever state it was, Iowa or Illinois. I'm not even sure, because I don't have my grandfather or father to consult at this point. But they were one of the larger poultry operations in the Midwest. So he was very happy for them and pleased with the advice he had given them. But he was more than surprised when they, on one of his periodic visits, came up with a counter proposal of their own. He had first proposed that they switch to poultry concentration, but now when he sat down with them at this same dining room table, their mother, in the meantime, had died. She wasn't crocheting in the next room. It was just the two brothers and Granddad. They said, "Now, Mr. Mosher, we're very grateful for this good advice you've given us over the years. It's helped us a lot, and we can't fully express our gratitude to you for this. We're not very good with words. We're men who like action and like being outside, as you understand. We don't talk too much, but between ourselves, we've discussed this, and we've decided that we would like to make you a full partner in our operation, a full 1/3 partner. You wouldn't have to farm with us. If you keep giving us this good advice, we'll split our proceeds from our crops and our poultry evenly with you, 3 parts." Granddad listened to this, and he was flabbergasted. No one had made him such an offer before. He said, "You know, I'm very glad you two are doing so well. People who can't afford to eat steak on Sunday for their Sunday dinner, at least they can still afford to have a chicken dinner on their table on Sunday after church. I know this is important to people, to be able to have a good Sunday dinner, and you're providing it to many people in this area. But I have to say that becoming a partner with you, as you offer, so generously offer, is something I can't do. I have to, with regret, turn down your generous offer because I'm just doing my job here by giving you advice. This is what I do. You farm, you raise your poultry. I go around and talk to various farmers at their farms and do the best I can to help them do a little better. It's a very hard existence, farming. I realize that. You're dependent on so many things. You're dependent on the weather. You're dependent on the vagaries of the market and your own skills. But as hard as you work, a farm can still fail through no fault of your own. I'm glad you're doing well. But I'm doing quite well myself, fully as well as I deserve to do in this life. I'm quite well paid for my work, sufficiently paid. I'm doing just fine. My family is eating well. We have no complaints. We'll stay friends, and I'll stay your advisor, and I'll keep giving you as good advice as I can from here out. Very good of you, nice of you to make this offer. But I think it'll stay 2 shares for you and not 3. Very good of you. So when I heard this story at 8 or 9 years old, it took me a while to process the information Dad had told me about his father. I didn't have a mind that could handle great statistical analysis. Still don't. But at that point, even at 8 or 9, I could deal with a few concepts. I knew about fractions, and I could extrapolate somewhat from the present out into the future. He was watching me, my father was. And he said, "Now, is there something troubling you about this story? Something you want to ask me that you didn't ask? I notice you've been kind of quiet." And I said, "Well, if Granddad had become partners with those 2 brothers, what would have happened then? Were they doing so well with their poultry operation that they got rich?" Dad couldn't help smiling a little bit at the use of the word rich, and that concept wasn't one that came up a whole lot in our family discussions. They became quite wealthy, yes. Why? What are you thinking? To which I said, well, then if Granddad had become a partner with them, a full partner, he would have gotten to be rich too, wouldn't he? Dad said, yes, I suppose he would have. And we would have become rich too, right? Well, said Dad, not yet. My father's still alive. He's an old man now, but he's still alive. He shows no signs of dying anytime soon. So we wouldn't be any richer than we are now, no. But I wasn't done with this line of thought yet. I said, now, if he had become rich from this poultry operation, then when he did die, we'd become rich too, wouldn't we? Dad let that sit in the air for a while. And he said, yeah, I suppose you're right. Now, I do have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. They would get a share of this potential wealth you're talking about. But if these poultry characters got to be very wealthy, then compared to how we're established now, living in Ithaca, New York, in a nice house that we built for ourselves, at the time of my parents' death, after they both had died, we would have more money. That's true, if this fortune had stayed in place. Now, does that mean necessarily, if we're comfortable now, that we would be more comfortable if we had more money? And I said, well, sure it does. It would mean we'd be rich. Rich people are the most comfortable people ever, right? And Dad said, well, that's the question. He didn't say, that's not what they teach us in church. He never said that, although we were still, when I was 8 years old, going to church. My church-going days were about to end not long after that, but at the age of 8 or 9, I was still attending this gloomy Presbyterian church in downtown Ithaca, New York. Anyway, Dad didn't bring it up. Dad did say, however, you know, my father and mother never had a great deal of money in their lives, but they've done very well. They're pleased with their children, I think. I'd say they're very comfortable with themselves in how they've done in life. And I'd have to add that I'm fairly comfortable with how your mother and I have done and with how you kids in our family are doing. I have no regrets. Do you? And I said, well, I guess I don't. No. But wouldn't it be nice to have a lot of money? Wouldn't it be nice to buy whatever we wanted? Dad said, I don't know. I think maybe that creates certain pleasures and it creates certain difficulties for people. But I wouldn't be so comfortable myself if I were looking forward to the death of my parents and impatient for them to die so that I could get this money that they had gotten from the poultry farm. You see what I mean? That can be a poisonous thing when you want someone else to die so that you can get their money. As it is now, your grandfather's alive. He's in good health. We're happy when we all get together, and we're not thinking back in our minds, ooh, I wonder when the old geezer is going to kick off so that we'll get our share of his money. That can be very tricky territory, and we don't have to deal with that. Don't you think that's maybe a good thing? Ooh, this required some thought on the part of a 9-year-old or an 8-year-old. I sat there thinking, I don't know. Maybe you're right then. Maybe Granddad was right in turning them down. It laid the seed in my mind much more forcefully than any sermon I'd gone to in any Presbyterian church. Dad didn't talk about any camels. He didn't talk about any needles. He had talked only about these two farmers in the Midwest and about my grandfather, whom I knew and loved. I said, well, Dad, how come I've never heard this story before? How come I've never heard you bragging about your father? It took me all the way until I was 9 years old before you told me about this. And Dad said, well, my father was never one to brag about himself. He would never brag about having done this himself. In fact, I heard about this from my mother, not from my father. She was proud of him, and she told me about it when I was maybe your age, maybe a little older. So I don't know how it works for a person to brag about himself. It's probably not a good thing, but I don't think it's a bad thing for a son to brag about his father. So now I admit I am bragging a little bit about the moral strength of my father. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that as long as I don't get carried away with the idea myself. So here was another topic for me to consider, bragging about myself or about someone else. And Dad said, you know, it's never worth bragging about being rich if you happen to be rich, or if you have some good quality that some other person doesn't happen to have. That's not something we would brag about, would we? And I said, oh, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe we wouldn't. But now, all these years later, when my father's gone and my grandfather's gone, and none of us in my generation inherited a dime in poultry profits from anybody, I think it is worth my bragging a little about my grandfather and about my father for having been such good men without ever having beaten their own drums about it. So I'm proud of them.